Hello.
Hello, Miss King. How are you?
Hi.
Hi.
I'm good. How are you doing?
I am doing wonderful. It's been a pretty day today, hasn't it?
Yes,
Yeah,
ma'am.
it's been good. It's been good.
How you doing, Miss Pajak?
I'm doing great. How about you?
I'm doing great. I'm doing good.
Good. Hey, Becky.
Hey, how are you?
Good.
Well, this is just a brief meeting with you to see if I want to show you as it relates to PPAT. Do you have any questions? It's 4:02. I don't want to take up all of your time waiting on other people to show. So if they come, they jump in. Do y'all have any questions? How are things going?
Things are going very well. I think the hardest thing for my intern has been trying to figure out how some of the assignments work for our age group. Because we, for example, the artifacts needed for testing, we don't do pre-assessment on things. So that's been a little bit tricky, but I think she's reached out to a former student to get some ideas. So, we're working through that, but she's been doing wonderful.
Okay. Who's the supervising professor?
I'm sorry, what was that?
Who is the supervising professor? The person from the university?
Oh, it's Miss Potter.
Yeah, she's pretty good. She's been through this before, so she
has.
Yes, she should be able to help.
Yeah, she has.
Okay. And if we are still experiencing difficulties, then we'll do something else, because I can very easily contact the ETS individual for that. She's really good with helping out.
Okay. Okay.
Ms. Pajak, you have any concerns?
No, ma'am, I do not have any concerns. It's going beautifully in my classroom.
Good. We have, okay, go ahead. I'm sorry.
I was just going to say my student intern is very much a hard worker and plans accordingly and, studying and helps. And so I'm very blessed to have her.
Oh, well, good. Thank you so much. And I hate to say this, but they're all not like that sometimes. Sometimes we get good ones and sometimes we miss them.
Yes, ma'am.
We hope that most of them are. Looking at the schedule, we are in week 8. And of course, the first formal observation should have taken place or should take place this month, whether it has already or not, because we only had a little time out. We didn't have any time out. So did we, except maybe Friday?
Just Friday, yes.
Yeah, some schools might have been late. But what I want to share with you today, we have we were discussing the PPAT task 1 is task due, And March, I think, will be for task 2 and 3 simultaneously. Then April will be task 4. So what I wanted to show you today was a brief video, because even though it's not on your maybe agenda to do a lot with the PPAP, I think being in the classroom is important, that you're able to provide some guidance and direction for the students. As Ms. King said, you know, she's trying to work. She realizes that we have some challenges with the assessment data, so they're still working. So it's important that you understand what it's about. So I wanted to give you an opportunity to look at the deep dive for task 2 today. This is basically from ETS, so I want to share that with you.
Welcome. You may already be familiar with the 4 tasks of the PPAT assessment, but today we're here to take a deep dive into task 2. The purpose of this presentation is to help you better understand the main components of task 2 and the resources available to candidates and teacher preparation programs. We hope this presentation provides a better understanding of things student teachers and teacher education faculty should consider. Let's begin by looking closely at how Task 2 is structured. Task 2 is broken down into 3 steps. Each has an important role in moving the candidate through the required activity of planning, administering and analyzing an assessment, and then reflecting on the assessment based on the results. Let's look at how these 3 steps are broken down. You can see the steps I mentioned on the left side of your screen. In the actual structure of the task, those 3 steps are then broken down into text boxes. Each text box is labeled with 3 numbers. For example, in this series of numbers, 2.1.3, the first number 2 represents the task number. This is task 2. The second number 1 represents the step number for the task. This is the first step in task 2. And the last number 3 tells me that this is the third text box within step 1. Therefore, text box number is 2.1.3. Notice that step 1 has 3 text boxes. Notice that steps 2 and 3 each have 2 text boxes. Understanding the numbering system on the task is helpful because the same numbering system is used on the scoring rubric. Text boxes are important because this is where candidates present their written commentary and artifacts. In addition to the written commentary required for each text box, the candidate will submit artifacts for 2 of the steps as well, steps 1 and 2. Let's take a look at the artifacts by step. For step 1, in the first text box, 2.1.1, 3 artifacts are required: the selected assessment, baseline data for the whole class, and the rubric and scoring guide. The number in the second column following each artifact signifies the maximum page limit allowed for the artifact. For step 1, the third text box, 2.1.3, requires the candidate to submit 2 artifacts: baseline data for Focus Student 1 and baseline data for Focus Student 2. For step 2, text box 2.2.1 requires 1 artifact, the data, and for text box 2.2.2, 2 artifacts must be attached: a completed assessment from each of the 2 focus students. As you can see, step 3 does not require the attachment of any artifacts. Let's talk for a few minutes about the written commentary that candidates submit. The written commentary is the candidate's response to the guiding prompts presented in the task requirements, and candidates will be asked to write in 3 different ways: descriptive, analytical, and reflective. Descriptive writing is a retelling of what happened in a school situation or event. This kind of writing is meant to set the scene for the raters. Analytical writing gives reasons, motives, and interpretations of events or decisions. It allows candidates to articulate their thought processes and the rationales they used to arrive at their conclusions about a situation or event in the classroom. Analysis also demonstrates the significance of the submitted evidence and artifacts. Reflective writing is the thought process that occurs after the completion of an activity. This is the kind of thought process that allows a candidate to think deeply about what occurred and what did not occur during an event or situation, and also to make decisions about how to approach similar situations in the future. It will be helpful to keep this information in mind as candidates prepare for the written commentary portion of the task. Now let's look at Task 2, Requirements and Rubric. This is the first page of the task requirements. On this page, we provide the focus statement of this task and the in-task Model Core teaching standards and indicators with which Task 2 is aligned. Here is an overview of what the candidate must provide: a written commentary of no more than 22,500 characters and the identification of 2 focus students and 8 different artifacts. The chart includes helpful details about each artifact, including a description, maximum length, and the text box location. Now let's take a look at an overview of the Task 2 rubric. The rubric has 2 parts: a holistic section, shown on this slide in bold, and an analytical section found on the following slide. Ultimately, raters use the holistic section to determine the quality and completeness of a candidate's evidence for each step. The words in italics are qualitative and distinguish the differences for each score point. For example, a score of 1 displays the characteristics of providing minimal and/or ineffective evidence. A score of 2 is limited and/or vague. A score of 3 is appropriate and connected. And a score of 4 is insightful and thoroughly connected. Teacher candidates should become very familiar with this document when drafting their written commentary and selecting artifacts. The holistic section of the rubric is followed by the analytical section shown in this slide. This section has a bullet for each guiding prompt in the text box. Candidates can use this to self-assess the quality of their response. The qualitative words for each score point are shown in italics. Highlight the qualitative words throughout the document to become familiar with the characteristics of each score point. Let's move on to review each part of Task 2. As with all the tasks, the candidate begins by providing contextual information about their classroom, resources, students, community, and other factors that can affect teaching and learning. This is the first text box the rater reviews during the scoring process. Primarily, this gives the rater any important background information that may be needed to understand the context of the response for this particular candidate. The response to the contextual information prompt is not scored. No artifacts are required, and the response text is limited to 1,500 characters. Here's an example contextual information response. This is representative of what we might see from candidates. Let's move on to the first step in Task 2, planning the assessment. These are the prompts for the first text box of the task requirements for Step 1. Candidates are encouraged to highlight the task requirements to help them become more aware of the activity and keywords that they need to consider before they choose an assessment focus for this task. As candidates are writing their response, they are encouraged to label the parts of their response A, B, and C. It's not required, but it does help the candidate recognize where parts of the guiding points are missing or needing more evidence, and it helps to add clarity for a rater who is scoring the response and looking for evidence that the candidate addressed each part of the guiding prompts. Let's look at the words in green and red. They have been highlighted green to draw your attention to the evidence that is needed by the candidate in response. The red font is to indicate the type of writing the candidate will be required to provide. Here are some questions that candidates should consider when selecting an assessment for this task. If candidates thoroughly read and dissect the entire task before attempting to complete it, they will be able to say yes to all of these questions. Note that the candidates must select an assessment robust enough to provide quality evidence for all aspects of the guiding prompts. It is helpful for you to be aware of the types of problems or challenges we commonly see from candidates for this task. Some of the issues we have seen with less accomplished responses include assessment choices that are not robust enough to provide the data for a substantive analysis. They also do not provide opportunities for specific and relevant modifications of the assessment for the focus students, or the rubrics are without substance. They're just an answer sheet. Whatever assessment is the focus of this task, it must allow a candidate the opportunity to fully demonstrate his or her knowledge of assessment. As you remember, we talked about the focus of step 1, which is the planning of this assessment. So when a candidate is choosing the assessment to administer, he or she must also consider this text box's prompts before choosing the assessment. This is the second text box in step 1, where the candidate is still in planning mode. Both of the guiding prompts in this text box are asking the candidate to talk about the assessment's learning activities, groupings, materials, resources, and technology he or she will be using as part of the assessment. Some candidates make the mistake of talking about the activities and materials that led up to the assessment, but these guiding prompts refer to the activities and materials of the assessment itself. If the candidates can't answer all of these prompts in the context of their assessment, then the choice of assessment is not a good one for this performance assessment. The response for this text box should reflect the activities, groupings, materials, resources, and technology that a candidate is planning to use to assess student learning. For example, learning activities could include assessment through such things as games, in-class presentations, or student demonstrations. Materials or resources are those tools that aid in the assessment of students based on the activities mentioned as being part of the candidate's assessment, such as manipulatives or a computer-generated exam. Remember, whatever the candidate chooses, the responses for this text box should all relate and be appropriate to the goal of the assessment. Also, notice the multiple parts of each of these two guiding prompts. Rationales for your choices are also required. The choice of focus students for this particular prompt must be made with distinct parameters in mind. Each focus student must represent a different learning need, and depending on that learning need, the candidate must talk about how he or she will modify the assessment and the rationale for choosing that modification, which must be connected to each student's particular learning need. Within this text box, the candidate must also provide 2 artifacts of 1 page each. Each artifact must show the data used to establish a baseline for each focus student. Remember, this is still step 1, and the candidate is still in the planning stage, so the baseline for the focus student needs to be established at this point in order to later show academic growth. Let's move on to the second step in task 2, administering the assessment and analyzing the data. Now that the planning is complete, it is time to administer the assessment and then analyze the resulting data. Note the response for text box 2.2.1 is meant for the whole class. The 2 focus students will be discussed in the following text box 2.2.2. In the first text box 2.2.1, the candidate is asked again to write about data in his or her written commentary. This time, the candidate is analyzing the data that has been gathered after administering the assessment and comparing it to the baseline data from step 1. This data is also shown as an artifact attachment in the form of a graphic organizer. Discussion and analysis of this graphic organizer artifact must appear in the written commentary. It must reference the data, and this discussion must connect back to the learning goals. The candidate must also discuss how efficient the data collection process was for the assessment and cite specific examples to justify the analysis given in prompt B. If you remember in the prompt for text box 2.1.1, the candidate is asked how he or she will be collecting data based on the goals of the assessment. Now the candidate must analyze how appropriate this data collection process was. Finally, in prompt C, the The candidate is tasked to describe how the students were able to join in the analysis of their assessment in regard to how they did, and to understand what that means in relation to the goals set for them. Some candidates speak only of returning the assessment back to the students with the score at the top of the page. This would fall short of the main idea of this guiding prompt, that the candidate must involve the students to a much more interactive degree. Text box 2.2.2 is solely focused on the two focus students. There are 10 points to cover in this text box. Note two things here. Each focus student must be discussed separately, since they each have their own learning needs and modifications to the assessment. The candidate should note that the words "from each" were intentionally put in each guiding prompt to alert the candidate to speak about each focus student individually. Also, the candidates must refer in their written commentary to the completed student assessment artifacts that are to be attached to this text box as they respond to the guiding prompt. The third and final step for task 2 is called reflecting. Reflection is the thought process that occurs after the completion of an activity. This is the kind of thought process that allows the candidate to think deeply about what occurred and what did not occur during an event or situation, and to make decisions about how to approach similar situations in the future. Text box 2.3.1 focuses on the candidate's reflection on the assessment for the whole class. Here, the candidate will take into consideration all the data that has been collected and the administered assessment. The candidate will also consider what was successful and what may need improvement or what may need to be done differently. Rationales are an important point to in guiding prompts B and C. The candidate's response should not be just a restatement of things that happened, but should be reflective as far as what happened and where things could be improved upon. There are 6 points that should be reflected in the candidate's response to the text box. The second text box for step 3, which is 2.3.2, is also about reflection, but it is focused on the two focus students and their successes during this assessment. Please note the number of points of evidence that need to be found for each guiding prompt. Note that guiding prompt A asks for only one successful aspect of either focus student, but it also asks for a rationale for that success. Guiding prompt B refers to the analysis of data that the candidate collected for each of the two focus students. In this text box, the candidate must now connect that analysis from step 2 to future instruction for each focus student. Guiding prompt C asks the candidate to speak to future modifications to the assessment for each focus student, and it should not be a repetition of what was already done. Instead, it should indicate thoughtful changes the candidate can make to further help the focus students demonstrate their learning. Remember, this is a reflection, so the more the candidate can make connections to previous goals, data, modifications, etc., the stronger the response will be. There are 8 points that should be reflected in the candidate's response to this text box. This is the conclusion of task 2 and its requirements. Here's a quick reminder of some available resources. Please visit the website for more information on PPAT. Included here are the links to that information. We have prepared a handbook that covers the information shown above. Much of what we have shared about the tasks, rubrics, and artifacts will be in the handbook. It is paramount that teacher candidates read through the handbook before beginning the PPAT process. Resource documents provide basic information about the assessment and task to help ensure candidates are prepared to get started on the PPAT.
Okay, do you have any questions?
No. Well, we get a copy of this video as well.
If you like,
Or
you
could
think it
we-
would be, do you think it would be beneficial? Because there's a task 3 deep dive. I won't use the time tonight to show it to you, but I can send it to you. You think it'll be
Okay, that'd be great.
Okay.
Yeah, that would be good.
The handbook should be on our webpage, the same page that you went to enter your information. The students should have
Okay.
already had an opportunity, and all I was gonna say would be to ask you to ask the students if they looked over the handbook or at least read it. And what I'll do, I'll go ahead and send out the deep dives to you so you can look at those. Okay?
Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much. If
Thanks.
you have questions, send me an email.
Right, thank you.
You're welcome.
All right, thank you.
Thank you so much for attending. I appreciate it.
Yes, ma'am.
Have a good one.
Thank you.
All right, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.